The modern kitchen is a place of absolute convenience. Ingredients arrive from every corner of the world. A pantry in April looks no different from a pantry in October. But step back just 80 years. Step back to a farmhouse in rural Saskatchewan, a cabin in northern Quebec, a fishing village clinging to the rocks of Newfoundland. In those kitchens, spring was not abundance. Spring was survival. And if you're into uncovering the forgotten realities behind everyday life, subscribe. Because the deeper you go into this, the more surprising it gets. The root cellar was almost empty. The flour barrel was running low. The last of the winter's salt pork was down to the rind. And yet, somehow, a woman in that kitchen was still feeding 8, 9, 10 people every single day. No grocery lists, no cookbooks, not even measuring spoons. Just intuition, calloused hands, and the quiet, inherited knowledge of women who had done this before her. Knowledge that today almost no one remembers. And here's the strange part. With grocery bills rising every single month, that knowledge might matter again. So if you want to learn the meals that turned scraps into full dinners, subscribe now. Because what you're about to see isn't just history. It's survival strategy. These are 25 forgotten Canadian spring meals. Meals that fed families of 10 on a single income. Meals our grandmothers swore by, and most of us have never even heard of. Let's begin. Number 1. Pouding Chômeur. Pouding Chômeur literally translates to unemployed man's pudding. Born in Montreal in the dark winter of 1929, working-class women had almost nothing left. No eggs or cream, just flour, milk, lard, and brown sugar. They mixed the flour, milk, and lard into a simple batter. Then they poured a boiling syrup of water and brown sugar directly over the raw batter before baking it. As it baked, the cake rose while the syrup sank, creating a self-saucing pudding without any expensive ingredients. The smell of hot caramel from a wood stove could make a family forget the rent was late. It was proof a mother could still provide something sweet, even when the world had given her nothing. Number 2. Fèves au Lard. Long before baked beans came in cans, there were fèves au Lard. These were the beans of pioneer settlers and the men who worked the logging camps of spring. Dried navy beans were soaked overnight. In the morning, they were combined with thick chunks of salted pork, a generous pour of dark molasses, dry mustard, and black pepper. The heavy cast-iron pot was then buried in the embers of a dying fire and forgotten for 8 hours. The rigid beans softened into velvet. The salted pork dissolved, leaving rich fat woven through every bite, and the molasses caramelized into a dark syrup. Heavy, sweet, and salty, Fèves au Lard was the fuel that kept Quebec running through grueling 12-hour days. Number 3. The Jiggs Dinner. On the rocky coast of Newfoundland, spring arrived slowly. With cellars mostly empty, families turned to the salt barrel. From that barrel came the Sunday Jiggs Dinner. Slabs of tough salt beef were soaked overnight to become edible, then boiled in a massive pot with hard turnips, waxy potatoes, and cabbage. In a separate cloth bag, dried yellow peas simmered in the same pot until they broke down into a dense peas pudding. The unmistakable smell of salt, cabbage, and slow-cooked meat filled the kitchen. When laid out on the table, it wasn't just a meal. It was the quiet triumph of a community that had made it through another winter. Number 4. Flapper Pie. Out on the prairies, where the wind came down from the north, a different dessert was born. Flapper pie emerged in the 1920s, but it became a staple when the Depression hit hard. The pie was built in 3 layers designed around what a farm wife actually had. The base was a simple graham cracker crust. The middle was a pale vanilla custard, thickened with cheap cornstarch and enriched with fresh milk. The top was a high meringue, cleverly using the egg whites that would have otherwise been wasted from the custard. 3 layers. No waste. On a Saturday evening in 1934, a flapper pie was a quiet act of defiance, proof that sweetness was still possible. Number 5. Tourtière. Most people associate tourtière with Christmas Eve, but the original was a spring survival dish. By March, the meat supply in rural Quebec was nearly gone. To stretch what remained, a woman had to get creative. She ground whatever pork or wild game she had and seasoned it aggressively with cinnamon, cloves, allspice, and nutmeg. Crucially, she mixed in mashed potatoes or rolled oats, sometimes equal in volume to the meat itself. The starches absorbed the seasoned fat. Baked in a rich lard crust, you could not tell where the meat ended and the filler began. It tasted like pure abundance. That was the quiet genius of a Quebec grandmother making 4 ounces of pork feed 6 people. Number 6. Oreilles de Crisse. Deep in the maple woods of Quebec, there is a snack with a name that makes people blush. Oreilles de Crisse, also called Christ's ears. It was the food of sugaring off, grueling weeks in March when men hauled sap through melting snow and needed intense calories. The answer was pork jowl, the last piece of pork left in the smokehouse. It was sliced thick and deep-fried in lard until the edges curled up like little ears. Eaten hot, they shattered between the teeth like pork-flavored glass. To balance the overwhelming salt, they were drenched in hot, freshly boiled maple syrup. Salty, crunchy, smoky, and sweet all at once. A Sugar Shack worker in 1910 just called it Tuesday. Number 7. Soupe au Pois. When the frost still clung to the ground in April, there was always one thing left: a bag of dried yellow peas. Soupe au Pois is one of the oldest recorded recipes in Canadian history. Dried yellow peas were soaked overnight. A leftover holiday ham bone, a few carrots, an onion, and a bay leaf went into a heavy pot and simmered for hours. The peas broke down, thickening the broth into something almost porridge-like, while the ham bone released its marrow and smoke. A bag of peas, purchased for pennies, could feed a family for 3 days. Reheated for breakfast or supper, soupe au pois is the soup that built Quebec. Number 8. Butter tarts. No single dessert captures the soul of rural Ontario quite like the butter tart. Born in pioneer farmhouses where fresh fruit was rare, farm wives used what they had: flour, butter, brown sugar, and eggs. The pastry was made with lard and cut into circles for a muffin tinde. The filling was embarrassingly simple: melted butter, brown sugar, an egg, a splash of vinegar to cut the sweetness, and perhaps a handful of raisins. Baked at high heat, the sugar caramelized and the top crackled, but the filling inside stayed gooey and almost molten. A proper butter tart threatens to drip down the chin with every bite. It was proof you did not need fresh cream or imported vanilla to make something unforgettable. Number 9. Dandelion Salad with hot bacon dressing. The moment the snow melted, children were sent outside to forage. In April, before the garden was planted, the yard became a grocery. The first thing to come up was the dandelion. Grandmothers knew to pick the leaves early, before the plant flowered, while they were tender. The washed leaves were piled in a wooden bowl. In a cast iron skillet, thick strips of bacon were fried crisp. Into that hot grease went a splash of vinegar and a spoonful of white sugar. Poured boiling hot over the raw greens, the leaves wilted instantly. The bacon fat and sharp vinegar cut the bitter edge. It was food from the yard that cost nothing, but tasted incredible. Number 10. Fish and Brewis. Fish in Brewis was the meal that kept Newfoundland alive through the hardest months, when fishing boats could not go out and stored provisions were all that remained. The foundation was hardtack, dense, nearly unbreakable sailor's bread, and rock-hard salt cod. Both were soaked overnight to soften and draw out the salt, then boiled together until they broke down into a soft, starchy mass. The finishing touch was scrunchions, cubes of salt pork fried until crisp and poured fat and all over the top. Heavy, salty, and rich, it is not delicate or photogenic. It tastes of centuries at sea and hard winters, and in a Newfoundland kitchen, it tastes like home. Number 11. Shipwreck Casserole. By the 1950s, Canadian kitchens had refrigerators, but budgets were tight. Working mothers needed effortless meals. Enter this dish, named for its chaotic appearance, looking as if ingredients had washed up after a storm. It was built in raw layers in a glass dish, with thinly sliced potatoes, chopped onions, a half-pound of raw ground beef, stretched to feed 6, and canned peas. The whole thing was drowned in a can of undiluted tomato soup, covered and baked. An hour and a half later, it transformed. The potatoes cooked in the steam, the onions softened, and the soup reduced into a thick, savory gravy. It fed a family of 6 from almost nothing. Number 12. Nanaimo Bars. In the coal mining town of Nanaimo, British Columbia, a completely different treat was invented. Built on coal and gray weather, Nanaimo needed a dessert that felt like a small miracle. Crucially, it was a no-bake creation. In a town where oven fuel was expensive, this was a gift. It featured 3 contrasting layers, a dense base of graham crumbs, shredded coconut, cocoa, and walnuts, a shockingly yellow vanilla custard buttercream, and a final layer of smooth, snapping dark chocolate. A single Nanaimo bar is a sensory event of cracking chocolate, soft custard, and a crumbly base. It was the perfect comfort for miners coming home from a 10-hour shift underground. Number 13. Fried Bologna. In the 1970s, as inflation pushed the price of beef out of reach, working-class Canadian kitchens turned to bologna, calling it poor man's steak. A thick slice was scored along the edges with a cross to keep it from doming in the pan. Dropped into a smoking, dry cast-iron skillet, the kitchen instantly filled with a sharp, salty smell. The edges blackened, the fat rendered out, and the processed meat transformed into something crispy and caramelized. Served between 2 slices of soft white bread with yellow mustard or beside instant mashed potatoes, it became dinner. It was never in a cookbook, but the smell of frying bologna is a powerful childhood memory for generations. Number 14. Hoover Stew. Hoover Stew was named, bitterly, after the American president blamed for the Great Depression. The name crossed the border, and Canadian families ate exactly the same thing. The recipe was painfully simple. A box of boiled macaroni, a can of diced tomatoes, and whatever cheap protein was available, usually sliced hot dogs. Everything simmered in one pot until the pasta absorbed the liquid. It was not good food. The hot dogs were rubbery, and the tomato broth was thin. But it was calories. In a country where relief lines stretched around city blocks, calories were all that mattered. Hoover Stew fed a generation, standing as a reminder of how close to the edge our grandparents lived. Number 15. Milk Toast. Some meals were never about hunger. They were about care. When a child came home shivering from spring rain, or a fever came on in the night, a grandmother made milk toast. A slice of day-old bread was toasted dark. A generous pat of butter was smeared across it, followed by a pinch of sugar and a dusting of cinnamon. Finally, almost simmering milk was poured over the toast. The bread softened into a warm, buttery porridge, while the milk took on a faint sweetness. You ate it in bed with blankets pulled to your chin. It was the most frugal meal in the house, made when a grandmother wanted you to know you were loved. Number 16. Mock apple pie. In the spring of 1935, last autumn's apples were gone, but a Canadian mother still wanted to serve a Sunday pie. The brilliant, deceptive solution was mock apple pie made from Ritz crackers. Broken crackers went into a raw pie shell. A hot syrup of water, sugar, cream of tartar, lemon juice, and cinnamon was poured over them. Baked under a top crust, magic happened. The crackers absorbed the syrup, softening into something that looked and tasted almost exactly like stewed apples. The cream of tartar provided tartness, while the buttery crackers vanished into the illusion. It gave a family the feeling of abundance in a year when abundance was nowhere to be found. Number 17. Rappie Pie. In the Acadian villages of Nova Scotia, Rappie Pie is a dish of pure labor that has no equivalent anywhere else. It begins with grating 20 pounds of potatoes into a watery pulp. Then the cook squeezes every single drop of liquid out through a cloth bag by sheer force, leaving a dry, starchy mass. That pulp is reconstituted with boiling, seasoned chicken or pork broth, instantly transforming into a sticky paste. Layered with shredded meat and baked at high heat, the crust becomes violently crisp, while the interior stays dense and gelatinous. Rappie pie exists only because Acadian women refused to let the humble potato be anything less than a feast. Number 18. Cretons. In the French-Canadian neighborhoods of early 20th century Montreal, breakfast meant Cretons. It is a rustic cold pork spread made from the scraps no one else wanted, fatty trim and tough connective tissue. Those scraps were ground fine and simmered slowly in milk with onions and warming spices such as cinnamon and cloves. Poured into crocks and chilled overnight, the fat rose to solidify into a creamy white cap. In the morning, a spoonful of that cold, spiced pork was smeared over hot toasted bread. The fat melted and the spices bloomed, giving a working man enough energy to carry him until noon. It tasted like nothing was going to waste. Number 19. Porcupine Meatballs. During World War II, meat rationing meant a family could buy only so much beef, regardless of how many mouths they had to feed. Mothers learned to stretch it. Porcupine meatballs became a beloved solution. 1 pound of ground beef was mixed with a full cup of raw white rice, chopped onions, and seasoning. The mixture was rolled into balls, browned, and then simmered in a pot of tomato soup. As they cooked, the hidden rice absorbed the broth, swelled, and pushed through the meat, creating little spikes that looked like porcupine quills. 1 pound of beef then comfortably fed 6 people. It was a culinary trick that delighted children and relieved mothers. Number 20. Tire-derable. Every March when the sap ran in the maple woods, an ancient tradition took place, tire-derable, or maple taffy on the snow. Fresh maple syrup is boiled in a cauldron over an open fire until it reaches exactly 238 degrees Fahrenheit. That boiling candy is then poured in golden ribbons directly onto clean, fresh snow. The snow flash cools the syrup into a chewy, pliable taffy in seconds. Children roll the hot taffy onto wooden sticks and eat it straight from the snow. Tasting of smoke, caramel, and the clean bite of melting spring snow, tire-derable is the ceremony of spring in Canada, the taste of winter ending. Number 21. Grands-pères au sirop d'érable. Dumplings boiled in maple syrup. Inside the sugar shack, cooks found a way to maximize their massive cauldrons of boiling maple syrup. The dish is known as Grands-pères au sirop d'érable, or grandfathers in maple syrup. A rough dumpling dough of flour, baking powder, and milk was dropped by the spoonful directly into the boiling syrup. They cooked in minutes. The outsides became coated in a thick, dark candied glaze, while the inside swelled into fluffy pillows that absorbed the syrup. Served hot with a little cold cream, the starchy, soft inside perfectly balanced the intensely sweet outside. It was cooking at its most practical and poetic. Dinner boiled in the sweetness of the forest itself. Number 22. Finnan Haddie. Before modern refrigeration, the Maritimes relied on smoking and salting. Finnan Haddie, cold-smoked haddock, was shipped across the country. It arrived bright yellow, tough as leather, and overwhelmingly salty. To make it a meal, grandmothers turned to milk. A fillet was laid in a pan, covered in warm whole milk, butter, and peppercorns, then poached gently. The milk drew out the sharpest edges of salt and smoke, leaving the fish tender and flaking. The infused milk was then thickened into a cream sauce and poured back over the fish. Served over boiled potatoes, it was quietly luxurious. Food from the sea, made gentle by the farm. Number 23. Saskatoon Berry Pie, Prairie Tradition. Long before European settlers arrived, the native Saskatoon berry was essential to the Cree and Métis on the prairies. Pioneer families quickly adopted the earthy, slightly almond-flavored berry, preserving them in barrels packed with snow. Every spring, a Saskatoon berry pie was baked. Tossed with a little sugar and lemon, the berries went into a rustic lard crust. Baked until the filling bubbled up through the top crust in dark purple rivers, it released a deep, jammy sweetness. The smell of a Saskatoon berry pie cooling on a windowsill is the defining scent of a prairie childhood, a pie that tastes like the land itself. Number 24. Bannock. Introduced by Scottish fur traders and adapted by Indigenous peoples, bannock is a cornerstone of Canadian history. The recipe is ruthlessly simple: flour, baking powder, salt, fat, and water. It needs no oven. It can be baked dense in a heavy skillet, fried in hot oil until crispy, or wrapped around a green stick and roasted smoky over campfire coals. Bannock traveled well and kept perfectly. It fed fur trappers, soldiers, and families across the continent. Today, torn hot from a skillet and spread with butter and jam, it tastes as important as it ever has. Number 25. Tarte au sucre, sugar pie, was the final defiant act of a Quebec grandmother who refused to skip dessert no matter how empty her pantry was. An exercise in minimalism, it required only brown sugar, a little cream or milk, a dusting of flour, and vanilla. Poured into a raw pie shell, it baked until the sugar and cream caramelized. The top crackled into a thin crust, while the inside became a dense, dark, fudge-like custard. Melting on the tongue in waves of molasses and browned butter, it proves you only need a few staples and a determined cook to make something unforgettable. 25 meals. None of them invented in a restaurant. None of them designed by a chef. None of them developed in a test kitchen. They were created by women with dirt under their nails and 6 children pulling at their aprons. By grandmothers who had learned from their own grandmothers. By cooks who had no measuring spoons, no written recipes, and no margin for failure. And yet they fed this country. They fed it through the Depression, through 2 wars, through rationing, through failed harvests, through endless winters. They fed it without a supermarket, without a freezer, without a cookbook. They fed it with knowledge. And that knowledge is still here, if you know where to look. In the faded recipe cards tucked into kitchen drawers. In the cast iron pans passed down through 3 generations. In the stories told at family tables by the oldest person still in the room. If one of these meals brought back a memory, if a taste or a smell or a grandmother's voice suddenly came back to you while you were listening, write it down today before it fades. Because a recipe is not just a list of ingredients. It is a life. It is proof that someone cared enough to feed the people they loved, even when the world had given them almost nothing to work with. That is the real wisdom our grandmothers left us. And if you want more stories like this, forgotten meals, lost traditions, and the quiet brilliance of the kitchens that built this nation, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below telling me about the meal your grandmother swore by. I'd love to read every one of them.